All right, everybody, we are back with another episode of the Influencer Marketing Blueprint. Today, one of my favorite people in the D2C marketing landscape, the Twitter sphere, as we would say, or now I should say X, Jeremiah Prummer from No Commerce, the man behind that platform. So we talk all things influencer, of course, but when it comes to post-purchase surveys, things such as he's seeing one brand had 9x higher attribution on survey for their influence marketing compared to promo codes. What he sees on average is 2 to 4x, but certain brands have a 9x higher attribution compared to promo code usage. We get into some psychology around post-purchase surveys, whether somebody believes or actually saw your ad for the first time, but we're really looking for where do they remember seeing your ad for the first time, some of the psychology around that, and then how is it informing brands today to make better decisions when it comes to media buying, influencer marketing, what brands or types of brands should be using post-purchase surveys, some fascinating stuff. Excited for you guys to jump in and listen in. All right, let's jump in. What's up, Taylor?
How we doing, C-Dub?
Doing good. Today, we're back with another episode of the Influence Marketing Blueprint. There's a lot of nice people out in the D2C community, but I would say today we have the nicest of all the people on D2C community, and that is Jeremiah Prummer in the house from No Commerce. What's up, my man?
Hey, thanks guys for having me. I think that you're probably overselling it a little bit on the niceness, but I do try to be nice to people. So it's good. I know Cody, we've gotten to hang out a couple times in person, which is fun. What was it? In Vegas at Shop Talk, I think, and then also at the
Sendlane
conference in September. So yeah, it's good to see you.
Seeing you everywhere.
I know. Taylor, I never see you in person, but I see you all over the internet. So it's good.
Yeah, screw me, man. Whatever.
Tell us about you briefly and what you're up to at No Commerce. I'm assuming a lot of people know about No, but no pun intended. But let's just jump in.
Yeah, I'll just kind of run back a little bit to kind of my beginning in the D2C space. So I started in 2012 building WooCommerce extensions. So that was kind of how I got going in D2C. I did that for 4 years, a little bit of consulting and stuff throughout that as well. I started my own brand, which was abysmal. I don't know. Sometimes I post a little bit about that, but I lost all my money. I'd sold my part in my WordPress plugin business before that. So I lost all that money and went into debt pretty significantly from there. So it was not a great experience. I made a lot of mistakes. And so then kind of worked my way out of that and worked with a couple other startups and stuff for a few years, and then started No in 2020. And so No actually was born out of an agency, Lunar Solar Group. So they basically had a very light survey tool they built internally, took that, put that out there as like our prototype application, because I didn't really know the Shopify ecosystem. And then we started building our main platform, the customer insight platform that we have today. So I think one thing you'll see from me over the coming months is a pretty significant shift in the way that we talk about No. Up to this point, it's a survey platform. That's kind of been the language that we've used around it. But the end vision was always to build a customer insight platform. And so I think you'll see that we really are going to start leaning into that more. We finally have some of the things in place that we feel like can actually like make it live up to that. And so there's some cool things there. But yeah, at its core, surveys in D2C is what we do. We work with almost 3,000 brands now. We should cross 3,000 next month. And
congrats, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been fun. And I think I remember the first 7-figure brand that signed up, and I was like, wow, this is great. This brand's doing 7 figures a year. And now it's like, I don't know, we have dozens that are 9 figures. I don't know the exact number, but so it's changed a lot in the last 3 years, right? Not what I would have thought it was going to be necessarily. I think our customers do something like 15 billion a year in online revenue, and then a lot of them are really strong in other channels as well, Amazon, retail, their own stores, all that kind of stuff. So it's been a fun journey for sure. And I think it's, I really feel like we're now positioned to lean more into the deeper insight piece of things and not just a survey tool that shows, a few million times a month. So.
Come on. Well, tying your platform and what it is you do to our show here, the Influencer Marketing Blueprint. I think one of the most interesting data points that I've seen from you, and it was actually a reply to one of my posts, you mentioned that you guys see 9x higher attribution than what's actually reported typically from influencer promo codes.
Yep.
Is that typical? Why such higher attribution in your mind? This is obviously just such a black box within the world of influencer marketing for so many. So I'm just curious to hear more on your 2 cents on this.
So it's really interesting with, I'm going to give you a long answer here. So thinking
Please.
about just like the psychology of a customer, right? And the way that people actually buy products. I think that's one thing that a lot of times we miss in the advertising space is we're looking at things in a very myopic view. So we have an ad that gets run and you see you're looking at the results and you're trying to understand the effectiveness of the ad very quickly, right? You're looking at the 24-hour results, the 7-day results, and you're looking at what's actually happening and how effective is this in a very short window of time. But the reality is that with a lot of products, it takes a while for somebody to buy. And I think when it comes to influencers, you see this as well, right? So where we see a lot of success in influencers is things like baby products. So, and I don't know if you guys work with those kinds of brands, but that's an example that we see working really well. Like all the brands we work with
Hello Bello.
Oh, you
I'm
do?
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they had to have done some things really well to get to 180 million in revenue. That's quite impressive. Yeah. So at least on the acquisition side of things, they're doing some things right. So yeah, it's like that category, for instance, baby products. You're looking at a very specific type of person who's going to be following those influencers and engaging with those products and a very specific life cycle. So I have 2 small children, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So that they both just had their birthdays recently. And so when you, especially on our first child, you have no idea what you need, right? And so you start following all the influencers, reading all the blogs, all that kind of stuff. You start looking at the different types of bottles and sleep sacks and all these different things, swings, all that stuff, right? So you're going through all these things and you're relying on experts to give you advice. Like that is probably the number one way that people buy products in that space, right? Ads have an impact for sure. Ads may introduce you, but usually you're doing research before you're buying. And so what we see in that space is really long time to first purchase. So oftentimes, and part of that's because of the life cycle of a pregnancy too. So you find out you're pregnant, you're having a baby in 8 or 9 months, right? And then you're like, wow, okay, we got to start learning things. And so you start learning things, but you may not actually need that thing for a year. And so you're probably not going to buy it today, right? And so in that space, and I just think this is like the clearest example of where influencers really shine. So here you learn about a product, you explore, you do your research, you probably put it on some sort of list, and then a year later, you're going to buy the product. And so what we see is tons of people buying those products because an influencer influenced it. So going back to the promo code thing, where that really breaks down on a promo code is that if I found that out a year ago and I was looking at a specific product, I'm probably not going to remember the promo code or even go look for the promo code. And if I do get a promo code, I'll probably just go search on Google for a code, right? And try to get a discount. So it may not be associated to that person at all. It may be your welcome email, promo code, whatever those things are. And so what the specific brand I was looking at in that study was actually a baby brand. And what they saw was that they had 9 times higher attribution when you take the survey responses and you extrapolate it out to a full set of people answering the questions. So I don't remember what the response rate, but it was, call it like mid-30s. So you basically take the percentage of people who answer that question with that influencer, multiply it by 3-ish. In this case, I don't remember the exact math because it was like a year ago. And you look at that number and it was 9 times higher than the promo code usage. So I would say it's probably very case specific. I doubt that it's 9x all the time. But it is very common to see higher attribution from a survey than it is from a promo code. And a lot of that is just because of the way that people buy products, and every category is different in terms of the way that people buy.
So to sum it up, you're basically saying the consideration period is usually longer than the 7-day click, and
Yeah.
usually that you're not remembering that promo code when you see an influencer post about it, or even I guess the ad saying a promo code or an influencer posting it on
Yep.
the ad. You're saying, because I even saw one of your tweets, you were saying that it was like on average it was like 2 to 4x. So the 9x is like the baby life cycle, but the 2 to 4x is more average. Is that still standard?
Yeah, I would say like just like we haven't done like a full like, hey, let's look at 100 brands, break it down, which we should at some point actually, because that'd be really interesting. But that's like a pretty normal range. Is I would expect like 2 to 4x higher attribution through a survey than I would through a promo code. And part of that is the consideration window point. So like I should have looked this up because I don't remember off the top of my head, but one of the things that we often do, so we have a structure that we recommend for an attribution survey, and there's different, you can modify it however you want to, but sort of the base survey that we recommend at least has 2 important questions in it. So how did you first hear about us, and how long did you know about us before placing your first purchase? And then what you can do with that is you can actually look at consideration window by ad channel, and they are different. So it's different by brand, but it's also different by channel. And so and what's even harder about it is that it can differ from like brand / category. Like ad in some categories, for instance, TikTok is really common for it to be a 1-day consideration window. In other categories, it's oftentimes like 6 months. So it also depends on the type of product. So there's a ton of nuance to it. But in general, things like influencer are typically a little bit longer tail attribution than something like Google search in particular is very, very fast. Google search is almost always less than 24 hours or less
High
than
intent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
High intent. Yep.
So
Somebody's in problem solving mode at that point, right? So
how much is it varied by brand? So like for instance, like we work closely with Hexclad, and I know talking to Connor, they've started to put in like the actual bigger tier influencer names like in the actual survey, like
yeah,
some of the big chefs that they work with and stuff like that. But a lot of times, like the brands, especially that we work with, the mommy blogger with 75,000 followers, you don't know her name. Like unless you're following her and you actually came directly from her audience, no one else is going to know that name compared to like a Gordon Ramsay. So like how much of your brands are actually splitting it when it just says influencer in the survey, or they're listing out like literally all the influencers that they work with, and that could be fairly large. Like you can't put everyone if they're doing influencer in a significant way.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way that I look at it, or we'll talk to a brand about it, is what is just high level, when you're building out an attribution survey, where are you focusing? So that's kind of the first question. So if influencer is a focus for you, then let's invest a little bit more into understanding influencer. If TikTok is a focus, then let's invest in that, because the reality is you are always driving revenue from channels that you're not focused on at all. So you could have zero. You could say like, we know that Google is not a good channel for us in terms of driving new business, but people could still find you on Google and buy from Google, right? Or word of mouth is another one. That's actually the best example. Like you can try to impact word of mouth, but you really can't control word of mouth. It just happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can measure it. And so you're going to measure word of mouth, but you're probably not going to focus on it, as an example, right? And so when it comes to influencer, if influencer is a focus for your business, then there's a couple of ways you can go about it. So what we recommend doing is asking multiple questions and kind of tiering it so that you get so you can dive deeper. You get the high level view and then also a deeper view. So with influencer, there's two approaches we would recommend. One, you can actually have influencer be one of the options on your survey. So you'd have, how did you first hear about us? You'd have Google, Facebook, Instagram, influencer, right, as one of the options. And then when somebody answers influencer, you then can ask some follow-up questions around that experience. So who was it? That's a really easy open-ended question that you can ask, and they can just type in whoever they want to. So all that stuff is really good. One thing that you just pointed out, though, is the person buying may not know who it was, right? And so another way that you can approach it is to just have your top level channels. So the the place where the view was actually happening. So they could have seen a post on Instagram from an influencer, not remember who the influencer is. So you let them select Instagram as the location. So they select Instagram. And then you ask a question like, who posted about us? And then this helps you break down the difference between organic and paid too. So then if it's your brand account, then that's typically more of like it's usually a sponsored post sort of thing I'm seeing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's directionally, at least that's going to be a paid view. Or it could be an influencer I follow, right? Or just a couple of those different things where you can break it down. You can even go deeper into specific locations in the app, right? Was it your newsfeed? Was it an ad you saw? Was it a homepage recommendation? All that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of what we do is we say, what are your channels that you're focused on? And then let's dive deep on those 2 or 3 or 4 places and try to really understand more. So yeah, you might be able to say, okay, it was an influencer. They don't remember who it is. That's fine. We can at least put it in that bucket. Or maybe they type it in. It's somebody who they see as an influencer who you didn't even know exists. And that gives you the opportunity to give that person credit, reach out. And that happens all the time, actually. That's one thing we hear from brands a lot, is they'll say, I had no idea I was getting, 6 figures a year in revenue from this person on the internet that I just never heard of. And so maybe go build a relationship with that person.
Yeah, I would say.
So like we literally hear stories like that. So.
Oh man. Today's Power Minute is brought to you by Social Snowball, an affiliate platform for e-com that is focused on enabling affiliate partnerships for what I like to call the modern affiliates. So not the traditional affiliates, publishers, blogs, etc. This is the modern affiliates, such as creators, ambassadors, influencers, customers, etc. So there's many things I love about Social Snowball. One of the first things that comes to mind is they eliminate all code leaks. So if your codes that have gone out to influencers or affiliates have ended up on coupon sites, Social Snowball would eliminate this. Also, it's very important to have a tiered-based system to motivate your affiliates to continue to post and generate revenue for you. So they make that super seamless. Make it super easy on the affiliate to get paid out any which way that they like. So Venmo, PayPal, directly to their bank, on a Visa gift card, Amazon gift card, all that, etc. If you guys haven't checked them out, they're on the Shopify App Store. Go check them out today. You're missing out. They are clearly the best and our number one recommendation for affiliate marketing. Yeah, it even reminds me, like the guys over at Ridge, they use, I think they use you guys, but they were talking about how their head of influencer talks about they don't necessarily put influencer in the survey, I believe, but he says that YouTube, they do so many YouTube sponsorships. So anytime someone puts YouTube in the survey, it's pretty much they're just attributing to influencer because they don't run YouTube ads.
Yeah,
it's just
super interesting.
I want to bring up something. I thought this was a fascinating clip in your episode with CTC and Taylor when you guys were talking about the consumer index. You had a clip in there where I'll read the quote where you basically said, and obviously this is context, but I think it applies here. Context is that consumer index, which you guys should all go check out around how people are buying. But you're basically saying, you said you're not necessarily looking for objective truth. You're looking for what do people believe to be true. It doesn't matter where someone actually saw your ad for the first time. We're looking for where do people remember seeing your ad. And so it's did they spend less money versus do they think they spent less? I wanted you to just spend some time like breaking that down because I think that's interesting. I think when post-purchase surveys first came on scene, it was kind of like, this is all self-reported data. How valuable is this? That was a lot of the conversation, like in kind of like media buying. And now it seems like there's been this shift into adopting post-purchase surveys as just part of the attribution mix. Mm-hmm. So if you could elaborate that, I think that would be really, really interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things, and at some point I actually want to put together a post about this, but one of the things I believe very strongly is that every attribution model, I'll just use that as like a very broad term, has a bias. And so when you look at the attribution tool and what it's telling you, you need to understand what that bias is. And so in the context of, and I'll just use as an example, like an MTA model versus a survey attribution. So when you're looking at an MTA model, something like like Triple Whale is probably the most widely known, right? the bias there is that it's going to report based on what they see on your website, right? What is happening on your website, and that's going to bias the model. So in order for TikTok, for example, to be picked up in that, there's got to be an associated website visit typically for that to show up. And there's more nuance there, especially with MTA. There's a lot of complexity for how all that's done. But at the end of the day, it's biased towards what's happening on your website and what can we track that's happening on your website, right? And so there's different channels have their biases, right? MMM, or not channels, but different measurement solutions. MMM, geolift studies, all that kind of stuff. There's an advantage and disadvantage to every type of data collection that you're doing. And surveys are the same way, right? They're not exempt to that at all. And I think people very astutely point out the bias in a survey is that you're relying on somebody's memory. And so there's two ways that you can approach that. One, you could say, well, that's trash. Like, we shouldn't trust this at all because it's relying on somebody's memory. So that's one approach. Or the other approach is to say, okay, well, what do they remember? And why does that matter? And that's kind of the way that I approach it. And so say, okay, well, if somebody remembers finding your brand on Instagram, in reality, it may not be the first interaction with your brand. In fact, it probably was not the first interaction with your brand. They probably saw an ad somewhere else. Maybe they saw your brand 5 years ago sitting on somebody's counter in their kitchen, right? Like, there's no, just because that's what they remember does not mean it's the first touch. And so at the same time, though, I guarantee you're not getting a first click that's older than that when somebody's telling you about their interaction from a year ago, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one thing that people miss a lot is they look at the bias in a survey and they say, well, this doesn't work because of this bias. And my counter would be, well, that's true of everything, right? Everything has a bias, has a gap in the data that you're looking at. So what I really focus on is the memory. What is it that they remember? Because that remembered source has a massive impact. That is the thing that made them recognize your brand, remember your brand, and want to buy from your brand. And so if that is in the context of attribution, that matters a lot as far as I'm concerned, because that is indicative of it's telling you about that person's behavior, right? And about their motivations in a way that a click may not. And looking at like the DTCCI, the direct to consumer confidence index, that's the way I think about that data as well, right? Like, it doesn't actually matter if I am spending less or am spending more in the next 90 days. It matters whether I think I'm going to, because what I think I'm going to do has more impact on my actual behavior during that time, right? And so that's the way that I approach it. So
Philosophy 101. Let's break it down.
I mean, I don't know, like I think there's advantages, disadvantages to everything. And yeah. Overall, though, like I want to know what somebody's telling me, because that's going to have a huge impact on their behavior.
Everything you're saying, by the way, like promo codes, a lot of the times, going back to that a little bit, it's typically like 24-hour windows, right? Attribution, it seems. Yep. So like super minimal attribution going to those promo codes already. In addition to that, you're saying the consideration window within this channel of influencer marketing is it's longer than the typical channel. And with that in mind, you've even brought up examples like, I saw this a year ago from this person, or like with within the baby space, it's typically like a 9-month pregnancy. People take a long time to buy. Do you still think not only our promo codes are under attributing, but do you think your surveys are even under attributing based on everything that we're saying? Longer consideration window, people may not even remember, 6 months ago, this product that they're ultimately going to buy for their baby while they're pregnant. Do you still think, I'm just curious as you're talking, is that even under attributing? And should influencer marketing be getting even more attribution potentially?
Yeah, I think potentially. The other thing too is, there's the question of trust, right? And so to me, that's actually the thing that's most impactful with influencers is the trust component. It's like word of mouth. And so if we all just kind of like think about our own buying behavior, this happens to me a lot, where I might see an ad for something. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I remember seeing an ad. I can't can't even think of a good example right now, but I may have seen an ad for something and I find it interesting. I'm aware of it, but I'm unconvinced until you see your friend using the product, or your mom says something about it, or whatever it is. And influencers have that similar sort of impact that a personal relationship does. Probably not as strong, right? Because, sometimes it's sponsored and all that. But at least if the influencer is going to use it, then it's compelling. Actually, a really good example of this. One of my friends, he works at Netflix. He's my original co-founder from years and years ago, and he's got like he's a developer influencer essentially. So he's got millions of views a month on YouTube, and he's got 100 and something thousand followers on Twitter, and gets all this attention and stuff all the time. And so he posted about Cometeer coffee, which like I've known about it, I've had it, it's good stuff, but I'm like, I can't go for a subscription. And then he's talking about it. I'm like, man, maybe I do want to, right? And so it's because I trust him, I know him, and it has an impact. Like, well, I mean, he's drinking it. He's one of my best friends, and maybe I should just go ahead and do that. I'll support him in the process, right? And I think that's the kind of impact that an influencer has, that you just cannot do that with your own brand running ads. It's impossible. Even UGC, you can, like, that's a little bit better than your own brand telling people, but it's still not the same impact as an influencer. And so I think if you were to look at like a hierarchy of trust, influencer is near the top of that in terms of the I'm doing that backwards, but anyway, the point is that if somebody sees something from an influencer, they're more likely to trust that it's a good product than they are if it's just your brand. So that's one of the things I don't think is captured. So I don't know, first discovery, I don't know that it matters in some ways. And this is where the remember piece becomes really important too, because what you're also getting at a little bit there is the trust component. And so I do think influencer is really valuable. It's probably still, to your point in surveys, it's probably still undervalued because you're not measuring that trust piece typically. And that was a very long answer to that question. So my answer is I have no idea, but I would not be surprised if the actual impact is higher than what you can measure in a survey.
Probably a higher conversion rate within that channel.
Yeah. And that's something we don't measure, but that would be super interesting.
Yeah, it would. I mean, based everything you just said would be interesting for sure.
Today's Power Minute is brought to you by Mighty Scout, an influencer tracking tool. So you've probably heard Taylor and I talk about Mighty Scout at length in past episodes, but today we want to take special time to speak to it specifically. So if you are investing in any sort of influencer marketing to a degree, I highly suggest getting on Mighty Scout. First of all, it's going to track all of your organic posting that goes out. So if you're doing seeding, pay for posts, you can drop in all your influencers by campaign. And then once those influencers are in those campaigns, they're going to immediately start being tracked if and when they mention you by handle or any hashtags that you give it. So it's going to give and pull all that content, most importantly, so that you can know who posted, you can reach out for content rights, etc. Also, it's going to give you all the reporting and ROI on those things as far as metrics wise. So you're going to be able to know the vanity metrics that go out around those influencer posts. You're going to know everything that it goes into around influencer marketing in regards to Mighty Scout. So if you haven't checked them out, highly suggest them. Go to mightyscout.com to find out more.
How do you see brands on your platform using the survey data most optimally to make better decisions within influencer marketing, as well as in paid social?
Yeah.
And I'd be curious on that paid social front, how different are in-platform attribution and your data that's on your end attribution. I'd be curious to hear the delineation between those two and how different they are, the delta.
Yep. So a few data points there. I don't think that there's a better solution. Maybe MMM, but MMM gets really theoretical really fast. I don't know that there's a better solution for measuring a long customer life cycle than a survey. I think that's probably a fair thing to say, because you just don't get the same data when you're looking at like a 7-day click window, for instance. And so I think what we see is platforms like TikTok, YouTube, connected TV, they oftentimes see a really long tail impact in a survey where you're measuring the channel and you're measuring the time to purchase. So in that context, we almost always see a better attribution than what the in-platform data is going to show. And even then something like an MTA model. Again, with MMM, it gets a little bit different because it's just a different way of doing things. But MMM, you really have to trust that like the underlying modeling is working. You're really trusting in things like halo effects, all that kind of stuff, which is all like, I definitely believe in those things. But it's just like, there's not like a clear identification of like this order came from this thing in an MMM sort of context. So in general, I would say like social posting, influencer, paid ads, most of those things show higher impact through our channel, our attribution tracking than they would through other channels. Google does not show better impact. So I would say, I don't know what I actually don't know what the percentage breakdown is for most brands in terms of like attributable revenue to Google, but it's a lot lower than what we see. We see about 8%, 7% of total revenue being attributed to Google search. And so, and there's nuance there, right? Like, does Google get credit if they drove the search to your website? Like, they should probably get some credit, but they didn't necessarily drive the discovery of your brand or your product, right? So it's just a question of like what you value more. So I think that, yeah, in general, we see higher attribution. And like TikTok has said, they see their customer, they will give their customers ad credits actually to use our platform because they see higher attribution in a survey than they do in TikTok ad manager. So there's things like that where
it's a good partnership for you. Come on.
It is. Yeah. It's a good partnership.
That's awesome.
So, you think any and every brand should have post-purchase as part of the post-purchase surveys as part of the attribution mix? Or where does it make sense to bring it on?
Yeah. So short answer, yes, you should. How you use it, though, I think should be different.
Talk about bias.
Yeah, I know. Serious bias. Depending on the size of your business and your strategy, I think should dictate what you actually do with the survey. So
what if I'm literally just running Facebook ads? I feel like I already know the answer, but like I'm a one channel business.
Yep.
You know, I'm just trying to get to 10 million. I just run Facebook ads. That's it.
So going back to the focus piece, the way that I would look at it is, let's say you're under 100K a year and in revenue, you're just kind of getting going. You're not really at scale yet. You're probably still looking for product market fit. In that context, attribution survey, even if you're running ads on Facebook, is probably kind of useless, right? What you really should be looking at is money in, money out, and total business, really, right? So like, take ads and say, I'm willing to spend X% of my revenue on Facebook ads, and as long as that's continuing to climb and go up, and I feel good about it, then I'll keep it going. So that would be my approach there. But where a survey is valuable in that context is understanding why people are buying. What is it that compelled them to buy? What are maybe things about your offering that are confusing? Just asking those kinds of questions can be really valuable because it gives you more insight into the motivations, right? Again, that's a big piece of what we look for in a survey, is that motivation side of things. And then if you are a bigger business, let's say you're 7 figures a year in revenue and you're still just spending on Meta, I do think attribution surveys start to become interesting there because you can actually follow the trend line of that, right? As I invest more dollars into Facebook, am I actually getting more people to tell me that they're discovering me on Facebook? Or am I really just capturing demand that already exists for my product? Because that's a legitimate question that brands should be asking themselves, right? And I would say for Google, that is absolutely true. Like, I don't want to hate on Google. There's a lot of good things that Google does for sure.
Sweeping up on everything for sure.
But yeah, I mean, legit, like let's say you're spending $500,000 a year on Google and that's your only channel, you probably are wasting money. If I'm being real,
burning money.
Yeah. So it depends.
Discount that ROI by 80%.
Yeah, exactly. And
do you guys
help you measure that? So
This is just kind of a follow-up question to that. Is like a lot of this conversation in my mind, I'm thinking prospecting. I'm thinking people buying your brand for the first time. Do you guys, is there any interesting data that you guys have around repeat purchases when it comes to like people coming back and say like, why did you buy again? Or did you buy from the same influencer again because he promoted it 6 months later? Like that type of thing. Like what is that? How is that split out?
Yeah, that's a good question. For that, we I would say most brands that we work with don't really look at that.
Okay.
They're
Stupid question.
like,
Just tell me. That's fine.
no, it's not. It's not a stupid question. I actually think it's a really interesting question. So the
Just kidding.
but I think generally, and this is on us a little bit. Like we really focus on the high level attribution. So one thing that we do that is different from other platforms out there's a couple other tools that people use for surveys. We believe that how did you hear about us is not a good question. It's not awful. It gets you insight, but a lot of people will ask, how did you hear about us? And the problem with that is it is a little bit of a vague question. When somebody has multiple touch points with your brands, if they're a repeat purchaser, all that kind of stuff, what you're asking them is to interpret which of those touch points to give you the answer to, right? And so if they initially saw you from an influencer, but they came today because of a Google search, which one do they tell you in that context? And so they have to pick one of them. And so we believe it kind of muddies the data. And so the approach that we actually tell brands to use is ask, how did you first hear about us? And then ask, what brought you to our site today? And that second question is where you put in things like email, SMS, I'm a repeat purchaser, I'm restocking, those kinds of things, right? And because those are different than the initial discovery. And so where that does get interesting is tracking. Ads is still one of those, and influencer could be one of those options too. So I actually don't know many people that are breaking down influencer in that second question, but ads for sure. That will be one of those where you said, how did you first hear about us? Instagram. What brought you to our site today? I saw an ad. Where did you see the ad? TikTok. That's really interesting data because, and then let's say they said that they first discovered you 6 months ago. So you realize that person discovered you 6 months ago on TikTok, but then is buying today from, on Instagram, but is buying today from a TikTok ad. And we see that Google, that's really common, right? It's really common for people to indicate that they came from a Google search today, but their initial discovery was in a different location, like a TikTok ad. So.
Right.
So yeah, we kind of get at that, but it's a little bit different. It's not quite as in depth, but it'd be an interesting question to look into more with repeat customer surveys.
Before closing out, one additional data, like question on the data that you guys have visibility into, obviously a ton. Do you have any data surrounding attribution, surrounding micro influencers versus macro influencers, and which have a greater impact on the brands that you're working with?
We have not.
If not, all good. I'm just very curious to see.
I'm curious about that too. I actually think
we'll do a part 2.
Yeah. We should look into that. Just out of curiosity, how would you define the difference between the two?
Just followers, pretty much. Okay. I mean, how do we want to define that as well? That's right. Depends who you ask. But I'm just let's not even go like black and white on it. Just, someone with less following in comparison to a household name. Like we have a client on, know that, all of their, if you look at influencer, it's just like all Joe Rogan and all knees over toes guy. These two influencers that are macros that just get literally every other purchase is one of those names, and it's macro. But a majority of what we do is a micro influencer, and we would have a bias towards micro influencers having the greater impact. Individual names more than Joe Rogan or knees over toes guy, maybe not, but collectively the impact across the micro influencers, we would probably skew. Not probably, we would skew towards that as an agency. So I was just curious if you had any data on it.
I do think it kind of goes back to the trust thing a little bit, right? Like I know we have a bunch of brands that work with Joe Rogan as well. And so, obviously you said one of them, but there's a handful that I can think of off the top of my head, and probably a bunch I don't know as well. So like if I go and look at Joe Rogan, he drives a ton of revenue to the ecosystem, to individual brands. But I know that if I'm a listener of Joe Rogan, my level of trust, it depends. Like if I'm a longtime person who's like fully bought in on Joe Rogan, I probably trust what he's saying pretty significantly. But like me, I'm not. That's not me, Jeremiah. I've listened to some episodes here and there. I've seen his stuff. Like if I see an ad from Joe Rogan, I'm like, well, the guy's pushing product because that's how he makes his money, and it probably has no impact on me buying something. That micro influencer in that context for me is probably more meaningful. So I think that trust piece becomes really important there. And I would guess that micro influencers in general, there's more trust behind that person's recommendation because you know that they have less incentive as well. And so like Joe Rogan is making, I don't know what it costs for like a, 30-second ad on his podcast, but I bet it's a lot. And the micro.
Well, a lot of times he's talking about products that he's not sponsored by. Like he just got sent, or like the brand that Taylor's bringing up, he just discovered through another influencer, right?
Oh, so that one wasn't a paid spot.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. But actually the product seeding, because you guys do some product seeding stuff, right?
We dabble.
We dabble.
Yes, Jeremiah.
Anyway, the product seeding piece is, I think that's really compelling because you know that somebody's talking about it because of the fact that they actually liked it, right? So if I'm seeing something from an influencer in that context, I think there's probably more trust as well than if it's just something that's why talk about it if you hate it. So yeah.
Well, Jeremiah, what is the future of No? What's the product roadmap looking like? Give us a little bit of that secret sauce of what's to come.
Yeah, I kind of touched on it earlier, but we're getting really deep into just what does a customer insight platform look like, and we have something launching next week, the following week, something like that, where it's focused on insight at a broader scale than just an individual brand, and we've been really working towards that for a couple of years. We show close to 5 million surveys a month. I think we have like 7-8 million questions answered per month, so lots of data coming in.
Wow.
Lots of revenue associated with that data. So like our template question for how did you first hear about us sees over $120 million worth of revenue per month associated to those responses. So you can start to like really look at trends at scale, right? The direct consumer confidence index is another example of this. So we have a lot of those kinds of things where we are trying to unlock greater insight for the entire industry, and then for the brands that work with us to help them understand the bigger picture motivators that are driving people to purchase, not just the channel that made it happen.
Jeremiah, thanks for coming on, my man. Where do people find you? How can they connect with No? You got a special offer that's 3 years free for the listeners, or what do you got? What do you got for us?
3 years. Let me see. Message me. I'll hook you up with something. I don't have a special offer necessarily.
Okay.
But I'll hook you up. So yeah, I'm on Twitter now, X, Jeremiah Prummer. No Commerce, KNO Commerce is there as well. LinkedIn. So that's it. Nothing exciting. Just doing the normal things.
Super fascinating episode. We didn't even get into the fact that you're a Nuggets fan. We won't talk about that. But let's just close out the episode on a high note before we get into that. Thanks, my man. Thanks for coming on. Want to shout out and thank our sponsors here on the Influence Marketing Blueprint podcast, Social Snowball and Mighty Scout, both tools that we use internally and recommend highly to D2C brands that are wanting to leverage influence marketing and paid social and creative. Go check them out.